Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Adoption Happy Hour brought to you by NAAP. We are the National Association of Adoptees and Parents, where it is our mission to elevate the adoption community by promoting dialogue, understanding, and healing through education, awareness, and connections. I'm Marcie Keithley, your host for this evening, along with Jennifer Falsing in the Zoom room. And our other partner will be joining us here in just a little bit. But before we get started, we want to go through a couple of announcements. So, Jen, our disclosure. We want to remind everyone this is a public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential. Portions of this event are recorded and may be shared in our private happy hour group on Facebook and on our YouTube channel. So if you don't follow us on Facebook, please do so. That's where Melanie's replay will be. Also remain on mute. If you haven't already, please do so now. Raise your hand on screen or the virtual hand to be recognized. You may post your questions or comments in chat. If you are experiencing a serious mental health event or suicidal thought, please contact a licensed professional or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by dialing 988.
And I just want to share a little bit about our other programs that we have. We have coming up yet this month, First Families. It is on the second Thursday at 6 p.m., which that would make that, let's see, get into my phone here. That would make it the 10th. So next Thursday. And then Dr. Joyce McGuire Pavo does Putting Yourself Together After Reunion. And that one will be on October 22nd. So please, you can follow us on Eventbrite. You can go and watch happy hours on our YouTube channel. So please make sure you're following us and are aware of what our programming is.
That's all you have for me, Jen? Okay. Well, it's good to see all of you this evening. I know this summer's been a little challenging for our happy hours, so we're glad to see so many of you back with us tonight. At this time, I'd like to introduce our guest to you. Our guest speaker is Melanie Faith Bonner. Welcome, Melanie. I'm going to share a little bit with the audience about you before we begin. She is a domestic, biracial, and transracial adoptee, adopted at birth from Kentucky and raised in Eastern Tennessee. She began looking more closely at her adoption experience, confronting the shameful truths surrounding her adoption, as well as growing up in a conservative Christian family in the South during the 70s and the 80s. With political and social injustices at the forefront about 5 years ago, she was forced to face painful truths about the people she has always known as family. She began speaking about her very personal story and was surprised at how many people resonated with her experiences and began connecting with other transracial adoptees on social media. She was a guest on a panel discussing cultural identification, family, and DNA in Denver, Colorado this past April, where we met you. Excuse me, and facilitated a support group for domestic adoptees for BIPOC adoptees at Portland State University in July. Since then, she has also presented in front of colleagues at the University of Tennessee, where she works in the College of Social Work. Her story was used as the DEI goal within the department this year. Melanie is the mother of 2 amazing daughters who grew up with her as she navigated single motherhood as a teenager and young adult. Today, she is married to her very kind and supportive husband of 13 years. Together, they are proudly raising, I lost my place. Sorry, guys. Melanie's 15-year-old granddaughter. She's currently enrolled in the MSSW program at the University of Tennessee, where she is pursuing clinical licensure to eventually work as a trauma-informed and adoption-competent therapist. There is healing in community. I am honored to be among other brave and influential adoptees who recognize a need for change, support, and encourage healing, all while creating safe, empowering spaces. Welcome, Melanie, to Happy Hour. Go ahead and take yourself off mute.
I think I need to do that.
It's so good to have you tonight. We're excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So where would you like to begin? Let's learn all we can about Melanie tonight.
Okay, we don't have time for that. We'll start with so I'll just talk about my experiences growing up as a transracial adoptee and sort of try to explain how I navigated my identity throughout those years and how I kind of ended up where I am today and how I got here. I'm going to start off by reading the last text message that I received from my adoptive mother a couple of months ago. I have I started the Biracial Adoptee Instagram page about 5 years ago. And she requested to follow me there. And so she's been following me there for about 5 years, and she's not ever really said anything. But I was really hoping that by her following me there, that she would be able to kind of understand a little bit more about how I felt about growing up this way. And I was just trying to give her a little bit more insight of who I really was inside. And when I came back from Denver in April, I had posted something from that specific trip, along with some more personal information about my adoption experience. And right after that, she sent me a text. She has never in her life ever sent me a text message this long. So I thought this would be a good place to start. This is the text. Perhaps there is another way to look at your life. You didn't spend any years in foster care. You only had one family who genuinely loved you. You were not raised in multiple foster families moving from home to home, some of which were not so good and some were awful. You grew up with sisters who loved you, and while you do not remember, helped you and your children many times over the years. It was not your family who called you names and made fun of you. It was not your family who put you in the position you feel like you are in. You would not be the person you are today without them. I think you would be quite different. You had extended family who loved you too. We did not see the color of your skin as less than. You were a loved daughter, sister, grandchild, and cousin. I would think you would thank the Lord for all the people who have loved you. As for me, I can only apologize for causing you pain. I remember how excited we were to have you as our daughter. We were so proud of you. Somehow that did not happen for you, as of course you can't remember. I did the best that I could, and am so sad it wasn't enough. I did not respond to that text message. I blocked her from my biracial adoption page. That text message kind of solidified and reminded me of who she really is. She's always been the same way. She's very consistent. So I was adopted in 1971 from Henderson, Kentucky, by a young white couple from Birmingham, Alabama. They were Southern conservative Baptists and had 3 daughters of their own when they decided to adopt me. From what I can remember, I was adopted not too long after I was born. And a year later, they adopted another biracial child. And then a couple of years later, they adopted 2 more biracial boys. So that made us a family of 7. So there are 3 biological children, their daughters, and then me, and then 3 other biracial children. We moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, around in the early 70s, probably 73, 74. And we moved into a house in a diverse neighborhood. There were Black and white families there, sort of a lower to middle class neighborhood. My father worked as an electrical engineer, and my mother was a registered nurse. However, she stayed home with the children. She did not work outside of the home for most of my childhood. when I was about 5, my parents went to go join the local pool, Holston Chilhowie pool, that was in our community. And there was, vaguely remember, some kind of ruckus. The director of the pool board returned the check to my parents and said that they would rather shut the pool down than to allow any Black people in their pool. So this was in 1976. So my parents, and I think there were a couple of other families within the community that they went to go and sue the board. And eventually they won and allowed us to become members of the pool. Myself, along with a couple other transracial adoptees in the community that I grew up with, we integrated that pool. I don't remember any specific events that happened to me that were specifically racist or out of sorts, but I was growing up in a space where racism just wasn't discussed. It was looked at more of, that's just the way things are. So when we joined the swim club, we also became a member of the swim team. So we did swim team for several years. And during those years, we would have to travel to community clubs, country clubs to do some of our swim meets. And at the end of the swim meet at the country clubs, if you were Black, you couldn't do the free swim like the other kids could do after the meets, because they had a policy that you couldn't do that unless you were a member, and Black people couldn't be members, so we weren't able to do that. Even remembering that, like, I vaguely remember that, but nobody made a big deal about it. We just didn't swim after those. We didn't do the free swim. So the way that racism was dealt with, it just wasn't, like, they just didn't talk about it. We love everybody, everything, everybody, is God's child, and God loves everybody, no matter what color your skin is. It was probably around the age of 8 or 9 that I realized that me being biracial was something. There was something about me being biracial that wasn't very well liked. I was receiving certain messages, and I would kind of hear things back and forth. It was a very slow, progressive thing that happened. When I was probably about 10, I remember standing in the kitchen, or standing out right outside of the kitchen, and I could hear my father talking to his two of his daughters, his biological daughters, about why they couldn't date the Black kids that were in our neighborhood. And they were probably like 12 or 13 at that time. He said, and the words that I remember him saying is that there's just too much of a cultural difference. Y'all can't do that. But it was in that moment that I internalized that there was something wrong with me, because you're telling my sisters that they can't have boyfriends, but that's the union that got me here. So something must be wrong with me. So that's kind of where that started. I'm going to talk about the education part of the growing up for us. My parents were very religious. So we started out as Southern Baptist, and then we went to a church. It was a non-denominational church. And that's where we met a lot of several other families that had adopted kids. And we became friends with a couple of those families. And there was a group that they formed called, I don't know if they formed it or not, but it was called COAC. It was called Council of Adoptable Children. And so our social life and the things that we did really consisted of church and school. We did Sunday mornings, Sunday evenings, Wednesdays. We did church camps during the summer, that kind of thing. And it was a predominantly white church. And most of my friends were also transracial adoptees because my parents were friends with all these other adoptive families. So when it was time for me to start kindergarten, as I said earlier, we lived in a lower to middle class neighborhood. And my parents applied for a transfer for us to go to a school outside of our zone because it was supposed to be a better school. And so the way they were able to get that transfer was because of me. So they applied for what they called a majority minority transfer. What that means is that if you are this was supposed to help with, I guess, integration, and if you were the majority, if you were zoned to go to a school where you were in the majority, then you could go to a school where you would be the minority. So the neighborhood that we lived in, the schools were predominantly Black. So they could use me to get to the better school. And then that's what they did because their daughters, so two of their daughters were a few years older than me. Like I started kindergarten and I think they were like third and fourth grade. And so the transfer allowed them to piggyback off of me to go to this school. So that's kind of how we ended up with that. My parents were very big on education. So we went to this school downtown. We had to ride a city bus to go to the school. And then when I got to be in third grade, two of my older sisters, one of them had skipped a grade. So she was in the same grade with her sister. So when it was time for them to start middle school, they sent them to a private Christian school called Apostolic. And then they ended up sending myself and the other three adopted children to the public school in the community that we were living in because we no longer needed the transfer. So their children were at the private school and we're at the public school. Meanwhile, like I said, we're going to these churches. My child, the atmosphere at home was chaotic. There were a lot of kids there. My mother was the main disciplinarian. She was the one that was home. We spent a lot of time at home cooking and cleaning. We had a garden. My mother was also abusive, physically abusive. She was sometimes so extremely abusive that she scared me. She scared me. The abuse wasn't done to me, but I witnessed it. During those years, my parents fostered children. The first one that I remember, his name was Chris, and he had polio. He was from Hong Kong. I really don't remember how long he lived there. He was there for a while. I remember when I was maybe 5 or 6, he was probably 10 or 11. She was extremely abusive to him. And to the point to where I just would be silent. I got to be a very quiet child. I didn't know what he was doing that was causing some of the things that she would do to him. She would whip him with switches. There was an incident where she ruptured his scrotum. He was, like I said, he had polio, and so he couldn't control his legs. There was an incident where she accused him of stealing, and I don't remember what it was that he supposedly stole, but she made him wear this sign, and it was a big cardboard sign, front and back, that said, I am a thief, hide your purse, hide your wallet, I will steal it from you. He had to have only been 12 or 13. And we had to go to a baseball game. I think it was a church event that she had him wear this. I don't remember seeing him smile very much. And I just remember he was gone one day, and I don't know why he left. He was gone. And I was so relieved that he was gone because she couldn't hurt him anymore. And I just remember thinking that I hope he's somewhere getting love, and I hope that she didn't hurt him too bad. But I was really glad that he was gone, so she couldn't do that to him anymore. And then there was another kid. There was a couple others. The last one that we fostered, that same kind of aggression that she had with the kid from Hong Kong was the same kind of aggression that I saw with the other kid. His name was Eddie, and she busted him in the lip one day. And these are foster children, and I just couldn't understand why she was like that. I couldn't understand it. She never spanked her biological children. We would get spanked and we would get switched from time to time, but not to the extent that she had with a couple of the foster kids. I just couldn't understand that. That was really, really hard for me to understand. Around 6th grade, my parents decided that we were going to convert to Catholicism so that they could get a discount at the Catholic high school in our neighborhood. So we converted to Catholicism. I started going to Mass and confession and Sunday school at the Catholic church. At that time, two of my older sisters enrolled into Catholic high school as freshmen and continued there. So freshman year, I enrolled at Catholic high school as well, and my two older sisters, were seniors. And then they graduated from high school and moved onto college campus after they graduated. And my mother decided that she was going to divorce our dad. So she filed for divorce, and at the time that she did, she rented an apartment in the same area that we lived in. My younger sister and I went to move in with her, and my two younger brothers stayed with our dad. It wasn't too long after that I ended up moving back in with my dad. My sister and I used to argue and fight a lot, and so I moved back in with him. And then she bought a house. And then probably, I don't even remember how long she lived there. Maybe a year, and then she moved to Georgia by herself and left the four of us with our dad. I was 15 when she left and 16 when I became pregnant. I hid my pregnancy for 7 months. I was terrified. I did not have anyone to talk to. I was really scared. My father at the time had gotten involved with the National Organization for Women and was dating the president. And so he would spend a lot of weekends with her and going out and protesting for Roe v. Wade. And when I became pregnant with my daughter, I was a senior in high school. I actually became pregnant at 16, and I just didn't know who to tell. I didn't have anyone to turn to. My parents moved from Birmingham, Alabama to Knoxville by themselves. They didn't have any family here. So there was no other extended family. There was all of their extended family was in Birmingham. I hid my pregnancy for 7 months. I was a cheerleader, an honor student. I had plans on going to college. At about 7 months, maybe 6 months, I couldn't fit my clothes anymore. So I stopped going to school. And one of my sisters, who at that time was at vet school, she was attending vet school at the University of Tennessee. She did come home and told me she dreamt that I was pregnant. And I just started to cry. So she said, well, we're going to have to tell Dad. And so she and my two other older sisters came to the house, and we sat down with him and told him that I was pregnant. And he first asked if it was too late for an abortion, and they said, my sisters said, yes, it is. I had not had any prenatal care up to this point, hadn't been to the doctor or anything. And so I went to the doctor, and at that time they said that I was 7 months pregnant. One of my older sisters was studying, was in the graduate program at the University of Tennessee, earning her master's in social work. It just so happened to be at the same time that this was happening to me. So she immediately told my dad and told me that he didn't need to pay for my medical care, that it would break him, and that I needed to be on welfare. I had no idea what welfare was. I had didn't know what food stamps were. I didn't know what any of that was. My parents, they did not drink alcohol. They did not smoke cigarettes. So there was never any alcohol, drugs, cigarettes. There was never anything like that in our home. So we went and applied for welfare and got signed up for that. And then I gave birth to my daughter about a month later. She was about a month premature, but she was very healthy. I was at my sister's apartment, and I thought I had to use the bathroom. My stomach hurt really bad. And she didn't know what was going on. She didn't know what was wrong. So she took me to the hospital. And as soon as I got there, they said that told me I was crowning. And so my sister, who again was in vet school at the time, she was with me in the delivery room when my daughter was born. My father was in Washington, D.C. For a Roe v. Wade rally, and my mother, I think, was in Georgia. My daughter was beautiful. She was perfect. And I remember holding her and looking at her and thinking, what in the world am I going to do with this baby? It was a really scary time for me. My mother had come in town, but she came after my daughter was born, and she just wanted to know where I had sex. She wanted to know if I had gone to her house. She had put her house up for sale about beforehand, and I guess maybe she thought that's what I had done. I'm not sure, but I just remember that was the only thing that she really said. When I got home from the hospital after I had my daughter, the very next day, I started feeling very weak, and I went to the bathroom and saw something hanging out of my insides. Something was falling out. I called my sister. She took me back to the hospital, where they had left part of the afterbirth inside of me. So that was extremely traumatic in itself. The next year, or actually later on that year, I became pregnant again. And when my father found out, he said that I would have to go to a homeless shelter. So he took my daughter and myself and dropped us off at a homeless shelter in downtown Knoxville. My sister worked there. She was doing an internship there. So what I've gathered at this point is that they planned all of that. So at 18, I was at a homeless shelter, pregnant with a baby. The shelter was extremely scary. This was in the late 80s, right in the middle of a crack epidemic. I didn't know there was a crack epidemic going on. I didn't know what crack was. I had never seen crack. I had never been around drugs. I didn't know what any of this was. And there was a room there when you first walk in. It was a huge room with transients just piled in there. So they would let them in early in the morning and then let them go late at night. Or they would have to be in by like 10 or 11, and then they had to leave by 7 or 8 in the morning. But they were prostitutes, drug addicts, and it was just one room where they would pile up in there. My daughter and I were in a room down the hall. We had a room to ourselves, and there was a big window that faced the alley. And my daughter was in a crib next to the window. And I had a bed, and there was a small black and white television in there. I was laying there one night watching TV, and something had kind of caught my eye to the side where I had raised the window a little just to get some air into the room. And all I could see were the insides of someone's fingers, like this part coming, the window was lifting up like this. So I jumped up and I grabbed my daughter and I ran down the hall and I told my sister what had happened. And she just walked me back to my room and made sure the door was locked. This specific part, or this specific part of the story that I'm telling, is something that I haven't talked about since it happened until just a few years ago when I was telling my husband. My story has a very common theme, and that theme is shame. I have been shamed. The shame, my birth mother put the shame on me by giving me up for adoption. I've had the shame of hiding a pregnancy. I've had the shame of the mother leaving me. There's so much shame that has been inflicted upon me that was really undeserving shame. I should not have been put in those positions. I didn't deserve those things that happened to me. When I was, I'm trying not to go back and forth, but when I was about 10, I was on the swim team, and one of my friends who was also an adoptee, she was white. She used to go to this camp every year. It was called Camp Montville, and she used to tell me about it, and she'd ride horses, and they would go on hikes, and it was just a really fun kind of camp thing. You had your bunks, and you're with a bunch of girls in a cabin, and she would describe it to me, and it just always sounded like so much fun, and I wanted to go so bad. And I asked my mother if I could go. And that specific summer, she sent me to camp, but it wasn't that camp. The camp she sent me to was called Camp Kiwanis. When I got to this camp, I did not know any of the children. And I was very, very uncomfortable. And I kept trying to figure out, why did she send me to this camp? I didn't want to go to this camp. I don't know anybody here. Most of the children there were Black. And the reason that's important is because up to that point in my life, I hadn't been around that many Black people. The only Black people that I had really gotten to know were the other transracial adoptees that I was friends with. I didn't have a close relationship with any other Black person, adult or child. There were no genetic mirrors. Nobody in my family looked like me. There was not one person that looked like me. And that was really difficult. So I'm at this camp with all of these kids, and I don't know any of them. And I just felt uncomfortable. I didn't know what TV shows they were talking about. I didn't know what songs they were talking about. I didn't watch those shows. I didn't listen to that music. I don't go to those church, that kind of church. So I couldn't connect with these kids. And all I remember about this camp was how uncomfortable I was. This kid with an afro that followed me around everywhere, telling everybody I was his girlfriend. And he made me blush the whole time. He was super nice, but he was just like, follow me everywhere. This kind of made me nervous. And then there was a story going around about this little girl named Peaches that was missing. And there, a lot of the kids were talking about it. There was a little girl that had been kidnapped. And some of the girls that were from the housing project where this had happened were telling me about it. And I just remember thinking how sad this was. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is horrible that this little girl is missing and has been kidnapped. So I get home from this camp and find out that my mom had sent my other sister to the fun camp with the horses and the swimming. And I asked her about that. Why didn't I get to go to that camp? Why did I have to go to this camp? And she said, well, it's because your sister likes horses. My mother had a way of separating us. I really feel like we grew up in a segregated home. It seemed like there were different rules for her daughters versus the adopted children. There were different rules, there were different things that applied. And it was something that I would complain about a lot. For example, staying up late. Well, you can't stay up late. You have to go to bed with the younger kids. And I wasn't that much younger than my oldest sister. She's only like maybe 2 years older than me. But she would just keep it separated that way. The older girls, the older girls, the older girls is how she would always refer to it. But I just noticed and saw and absorbed that the older girls, they were treated nicer, kinder, given more grace. They seemed to be loved better, differently, with more affection, a little bit more compassion. And I wanted to be like them so bad. I wanted to be loved like they were loved. And I wanted to be seen like they were seen. When I was middle school was really, really difficult. That is when I started being teased. My sisters were attending the private school and I was at the public school. And at 6th grade, I didn't have any other family members in school with me. And there were some white girls that would tease me every day. And they would kind of circle me and call me Zebra. And I was a very quiet girl. I was really shy. So I didn't really know how to take up for myself. But they would literally every day at lunch would walk around me and call me Zebra every day. They'd say, Zebra, Zebra, Zebra. When it first started happening, I really didn't understand what they were talking about because nobody had ever said that to me before. So I didn't know what they meant. And then when I understood what they meant, then I remembered my dad saying that my sisters couldn't date Black boys because there's too much of a cultural difference. And then I started remembering how my mom sent me to this camp and wouldn't let me go to that camp. And so all of these things started compiling. When I was a junior in high school, in homeroom class, there was a football player, and every morning he would say, hey, Droplet, how you doing, Droplet? And I would just play, hey, Brian, and I would just kind of ignore him and just whatever. Towards the end of my junior year, he leans next to me at my desk, and he said, hey, Droplet, you want to know why I call you Droplet? I said, why, Brian? He said, because you're a droplet of this and a droplet of that. I am not sure if my parents knew how hard that was for me to have to deal with that for so long. And I don't think that they did. I'm almost sure that I didn't tell them because I didn't have the words to tell them. I didn't know how to tell them. My mother, when I would go to her with problems, would always tell me to pray. there was never any solution. It was just pray. When my sister, or I'm sorry, after I was at the shelter, my daughter's grandparents came and picked her up. I'm not really sure how they found out we were there, but they came and got her. At the time when that was going on with me, I had no idea how serious and how traumatic of an experience that I was having. I did not understand that. As a grandmother today, I can only imagine what my daughter's grandparents were feeling. My daughter's dad was, I think he was in college at the time that that had happened. And but her parents did come and his parents came and picked her up and took her home with them while I was staying there. After I was there for a few months, I got an apartment in government housing. I didn't know anybody that lived there. It was a 1-bedroom apartment. I had no furniture. I didn't know how to write a check. I was 18 years old. I didn't know how to use the laundromat. Didn't know how to do that. I remember one time I didn't have any food. And I called my social work sister, who took me to a food pantry and filled up a paper bag with beans and a bag of pinto beans and cans of whatever was at the food pantry. When I told my husband this story about 4 years ago, he couldn't believe it. And when I started talking to him about it, I didn't even realize how horrible that was. And he started to tell me, Melanie, there's no way that my sister would have gotten through the front door if I worked at a homeless shelter. You would have gotten in the car with me and we would have gone home. He said, I don't understand that. And if you were hungry, I would have just taken you to the store. He's like, well, I don't get that. And it was after having these conversations with him that really started thinking about these experiences and these things that I went through and how difficult this really was for me. After I moved into the apartments, I lived in the government housing for 7 years, right in the middle of a crack epidemic. There was an incident where my door was almost kicked in. There was another incident where somebody busted out my car window. My mother never came to visit me one time in those 7 years. After I had gotten my GED, I earned my GED. Actually, one of the girls that I met in the apartments I lived at, she suggested we sign up for Job Corps. So we signed up for Job Corps and went there, I think, for about a year. And we still lived in our apartments, but we were able to go there to take classes. I didn't know what to do. I had no idea. So I was just trying to find out what do I do? So I went to Job Corps with her and I ended up taking some CNA classes, I think. And then from there, I started going to a community college. And I ended up meeting a host of Black women that showed me the way. They showed me how to survive. If it was not for them, I don't know what would have happened to me and my children. I had one girl show me how to get turkey baskets at Christmas, which were boxes full of food for Thanksgiving and Christmas. She showed me how to sign up for all other things, for clothing. Another girl showed me how to apply for financial aid. She came to my apartment and helped me with that. I had a car for a while, and then there was a certain amount of time I didn't have a car, so I'd have to ride the bus. Um, so for 7 years, we were there. I got right before I was about to graduate from the community college, I had became really sick. And my my oldest daughter, her grandparents, she was with her grandparents, and then they actually came and picked up my youngest daughter and took her as well. And I ended up going to the hospital and staying there for about 2.5 months. I was in intensive care. So I get to the hospital. The night that I went to the hospital, I had developed a rash. My dad and everybody else in my family was out of town because my father's mother was getting remarried in Birmingham, and I couldn't go because I had class and because I had to work. So everyone was gone. So my friend ended up taking me to the hospital, where I was admitted almost immediately upon getting there. And she said that she was going to go back to my apartment to see if she could find a phone number to some of my family members so that she could let them know that I was in the hospital. I thought I had the flu. So the next thing I know, my mother walks in my hospital room with one of her friends that she used to work with when she lived in Knoxville. She had been here for several days, and I didn't even know it. When I got out of the hospital, I couldn't walk. I could barely open a Coke can. I had to have physical therapy, occupational therapy, and I stayed with one of my sisters. And then I ended up finishing community college. And one of my other Black girlfriends said, well, you can apply for married student housing and you can move out of those apartments now. You can go to UT and you can move over there. And so that's how I got out of government housing. I applied for the UT married student housing, and I moved in there and continued my education at UT. After I graduated from UT, I took my first job at the Department of Children's Services, where I worked as a child protective services investigator. I did sex abuse cases for several years. And there was a retreat that I had gone to. It was myself and a few other people that we staffed for criminal investigations. So there was detectives there. There were also the licensed therapist that works with the children who have been victimized was there, and a few others. During this retreat, a lot of us were sitting around one evening. We were maybe having dinner, a glass of wine or something. And the licensed therapist started talking about some of the division that was going on within the department, and said it was because there was a NIGGA in charge, but she said it with the hard ER. I'm the only person of color within this whole group, and nobody said one word. And I didn't know what to say. I don't know how I was supposed to respond to that. I don't know what would have been the proper response to that. Because again, racism wasn't something that was really talked about in my home. I struggled quite a bit as a single mother, a lot. It was very difficult for me to be stable. My girls, they're amazing. And my daughters deserved so much more than what I could give them. It was really hard. Um, when they were both in high school, I had become involved with substance abuse. I was depressed. I had just a host of things going on internally. I had been looking for my birth parents. I had found my birth mother, and she rejected me. And I was told to never contact her again. Her husband, who was who was an attorney, had threatened to sue me for harassment if I ever contacted them again. I don't even know if I have the words to really describe the things that I was dealing with internally. It was just a lot of everything. I didn't feel like I had a grasp on reality. I didn't, I have these amazing girls, and I just didn't have the tools that I needed to do what they needed. It was really, really difficult. So I know we only have 5 minutes. I see that. So I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to share my screen really quickly just so I can kind of show you. I presented at a conference this past weekend, and I created this presentation so you can kind of see some pictures of what I'm talking about, and I'll just briefly talk about it. All right. So this is just kind of showing how I navigated my identity. This was when I was born, or not too long after, I guess. And then this was when, with my 3 older sisters here. This was preschool and kindergarten. This was the big family here. My 2 younger brothers, sisters. This was Chris, the one from Hong Kong. It's my mother. This is the childhood house we grew up in. This was middle school here. And then here's high school. Baby daddy number 1. I was a cheerleader here. This was my senior picture. There's me and my younger sister. This was when I was at Catholic high school. This was my dad. They printed him up in the paper while I was having my daughter. He was fighting for the rights of women. And there's my daughter's birth certificate, the hospital birth certificate. These are some of my friends that I made when I lived in government housing, and I'm still friends with them today. This was when I first had my daughter. She was so tiny, but she was perfect. And there we are. This is her dad and I and her, and this is my second baby daddy. And these are my 2 pretty babies. And this is my husband. We got married 13 years ago. And he has helped me through so much. He has really, him and his family have shown me so much about family and support and love and connection in ways that I'd never seen before. It's been pretty incredible. And then this is where I am today. I feel so good where I am today. I've made it. I am a mother. I am a grandmother. And I have a beautiful family, and I'm proud of them. There is no shame here anymore. I don't own any of that shame. That shame belongs to the people that tried to put it on me, and I'm giving it back to them. I've taken back my power. I'm in reunion with cousins on my dad's side, on my paternal father's side, my biological dad's side, I'm sorry. So we're in reunion, and they live in Louisville, Kentucky, which is close. So it's really neat. They're a really neat bunch. And I'm also a grad student. I'm working on my master's in social work, so that I can continue to help and support other adoptees who are navigating these really difficult spaces. And I do believe in the truth. I am a truth seeker and a truth teller, and I will always continue to do that. And thank you, everybody, for listening to me today.
Thank you, Melanie. Wow. You are a survivor and a seeker of truth. And you did reclaim your power. It's really, really amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us this evening.
You're welcome.
At this time, we would like to open it up to questions from our attendees. If you would like to raise your virtual hand, if you have a question for Melanie, please go ahead and do so at this time. I'm going to kick it off and ask the first one, Melanie, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I would like to talk about Chris for a second.
Sure.
Did you ever get any more information? Did you ever find out where he went, what happened? He was just there 1 minute and gone, and that was the end of it, and it wasn't spoken about?
You know, one thing that my family does not do is they don't talk about hard stuff. When my mom left, nobody talked about it. I had actually, a few years ago, I had a talk with one of my older sisters. And I had sat down with her because I was having a really hard time trying to understand things that had happened.
Mm-hmm.
And her first response to me is she doesn't remember her childhood. And I was a little angry about that because how dare you not remember? Of course, it's convenient for you not to remember. But like I told her, I remember. And then when I mentioned Eddie to her, oh, I do remember that because I told Mom I was going to call the police if she did that again. And I said, okay, so you do remember. And again, with Chris, because I was so young, I don't know where he went. I don't know. I think he went to another family.
You do know that he went to another family.
He went to another family. Yeah. But I don't know anything after.
And then when you were pregnant with your first child, so they basically put you went to a shelter.
Well, no,
did you ever get to come back home, or were you just?
Well, when I was pregnant with my first daughter, they didn't find out until 7 months. So I went to go to my sister's house and I stayed, or her apartment where she was at vet school. So I stayed there with her and then until my daughter was born. And then I went back to my dad's house. And then when I got pregnant with my second daughter is when I went to the shelter and I did not go back.
But you kept the relationship with your adopted
dad
through all of that and your siblings and
so because of shame, this was a punishment for me. I was bad. I did something really horribly wrong and I need to redeem myself. It was shame. I wasn't angry at him. I looked at it as, Melanie, you're in big ass trouble. You have really messed up. I put it all on me. I took all of that. I took responsibility for every single bit of that. I was trying my best to live up to their expectations by going to school. Like I was trying to climb up this ladder to try to get back in their good graces. Yeah, and then I'm sorry.
Shame and just the shame of it. This is what causes damage. Shame breeds in secrecy. It just continues to grow and grow. But when it's spoken, when you own it and it's no longer yours, it dissipates. So it has to be brought to the surface for an order. Oh my goodness.
Right. That's why I read the text message at the very beginning, because she's been gone almost 40 years. She doesn't know me at all. She doesn't know where I work. She probably doesn't know. I mean,
wow.
There was the thing that I thought too that was really interesting is that so my parents' children, social worker, veterinarian, out of the 4 adopted kids, only one of us graduated high school. And it wasn't me because I had to get my GED. All 4 of us have been homeless. All 4 of us have had substance abuse issues. All 4 of us have lived in poverty. All 4 of us have been on welfare at some point. All 4 of us have been arrested for something. Their daughters own their own houses by the time they were 25, have their, yeah, it's a thing.
Okay, I need to stop the recording and open it up to the audience.